Deadwood's $1 bride, the Gunslinger, the stolen gold, and the bloodbath that shook 1876. The sun hung low over the Dakota Territory, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that clashed with the dusty streets of Deadwood. The town was alive with energy, but it was a restless kind of energy, the sort that hinted at danger lurking around every corner. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their fronts worn from years of wind, rain, and the constant rush of boots on their porches. Signs swung lazily in the breeze, advertising saloons, general stores, and boarding houses, while the smell of smoke, horse sweat, and dust mixed into a scent that was uniquely Deadwood. Amid the bustle, a young woman named Clara Hayes arrived. She stepped off a creaking wagon, clutching the worn leather straps of her trunk. Her clothes were simple and plain, not because she lacked taste, but because she had little choice. Clara had traveled for days across open plains and rocky hills, driven by a mixture of necessity and determination. She had heard stories of opportunity in Deadwood, of fortunes waiting to be found in the Black Hills and the gold mines, and she was determined to see if the tales were true. Yet as she took her first careful steps onto the town's uneven street, she could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. The townspeople glanced at her as she passed. Miners with grimy faces wiped sweat from their foreheads, keeping a wary eye on newcomers, while cowboys and gunslingers leaned casually against posts, hands never far from their holsters. Clara noticed the subtle tension in the air. Deadwood was a town built on ambition and fear, and she knew instantly that survival here would require more than courage. It would demand keen awareness and careful judgment. As she made her way to the boarding house where she had arranged to stay, Clara caught sight of a man who seemed to command attention without even trying. He was tall and lean, with eyes as sharp as a hawk's. His hands rested near his pistols, not in threat but in readiness, as though he carried the law and danger alike in his presence. Elias McGraw, known by many as Silverhand for the speed and accuracy of his gun, was a man whose name alone could silence a room. His reputation had reached Clara even before she set foot in Deadwood, whispered in the camps and saloons as both warning and admiration. Their meeting was almost accidental, yet it carried the weight of inevitability. Clara had just set down her trunk in the small boarding room, a modest space with a narrow bed and a single window that looked out onto the busy street. Elias had entered the boarding house for reasons that had nothing to do with her at first, but their eyes met, and in that moment, the world seemed to tilt slightly. He saw not just a traveler, but someone who would require protection, someone whose presence in Deadwood was both fragile and determined. The proposition came quickly. In a town where danger was constant and threats could appear without warning, an unusual arrangement was not uncommon. A $1 marriage contract was proposed, a legal agreement that would protect Clara under Elias's name. The idea was simple in its practicality. As his wife, even in name only, she would gain certain protections that could save her life. The contract was meant to shield her from unwanted attention, to deter those who might see a lone woman as easy prey. Clara, though hesitant at first, recognized the wisdom in the arrangement. She had come to Deadwood seeking opportunity, and survival would be her first and most urgent prize. As days passed, Clara began to notice the rhythms of the town. The clatter of horse hooves against wooden planks, the shouts of merchants hawking their goods, and the distant sound of a piano playing in a saloon created a chaotic symphony. Every person she encountered seemed to carry a story, some marked by hard work, others by violence, and still others by sheer luck. She listened quietly, learning to read the signs of character in the rough faces and guarded eyes of Deadwood's residents. Elias, despite his reputation, showed her a different side of the town. He introduced her to the miners and shopkeepers who were loyal to him, men and women who understood that trust in Deadwood was earned, never freely given. Clara learned quickly how the gold trade worked, how shipments arrived and disappeared, how greed could turn friend against friend, and how even a small mistake could have dire consequences. She realized that the town thrived on ambition, but ambition without caution was a dangerous gamble. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the streets glowed with lantern light, Clara watched the town from the small wooden balcony of the boarding house. She could see miners heading back from the hills, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt, some laughing, some silent, each carrying a piece of the day's fortune. Gunslingers walked the streets with casual authority, and the saloons were filled with laughter, music, and the low hum of conversations that were never entirely friendly. The town was alive, but Clara understood that beneath the surface a current of violence ran deep. It was during one of these quiet evenings that the first signs of tension appeared. Rumors of stolen gold spread like wildfire, and Clara could see the anxiety in the faces of those who had something to lose. Miners whispered about gangs operating in the shadows, about masked men who could appear without warning, taking fortunes and leaving only fear in their wake. Elias moved with purpose, checking in with his contacts, assessing threats, and planning his next steps. Clara, though new to this world, began to understand the delicate balance of trust and suspicion that governed Deadwood. Despite the danger, Clara felt a spark of hope. The town, with all its chaos, offered the promise of opportunity. She discovered her own resourcefulness, finding ways to help Elias gather information, to assist neighbors, and even to earn the cautious respect of those who had initially dismissed her as inexperienced. Each day brought new lessons, from identifying safe routes to the mines, to understanding the coded language of the saloon crowd, to recognizing the subtle cues of danger in a casual greeting or a glance. Through it all, Clara's relationship with Elias evolved. What had begun as a practical agreement slowly grew into a partnership built on mutual respect. Elias, who had trusted few in his life, found in Clara someone who could observe, learn, and act when the moment required. Clara, who had arrived in Deadwood seeking adventure and safety, discovered in Elias not just a protector, but a guide to navigating the treacherous landscape of a town that could be as deadly as it was promising. By the end of her first week in Deadwood, Clara realized that life here would never be simple. The town demanded vigilance, courage, and a willingness to face harsh realities. Yet, she also recognized the thrill of possibility, the chance to carve out a place in a world where so many fell victim to greed, recklessness, or violence. Deadwood was unforgiving, but for those who could endure, it offered a kind of freedom and opportunity found nowhere else. Clara's days became a blend of learning and observation, of small victories and constant caution. She walked the streets with eyes open and mind alert, noting alliances, rivalries, and the subtle signs that marked a man or woman as friend or foe. The $1 marriage contract, once a strange and almost comical arrangement, now felt like a lifeline, a thread connecting her to someone capable of navigating the stormy seas of Deadwood life. She knew that challenges were inevitable, that the stolen gold and the dangerous men seeking it would soon pull her deeper into the town's turbulent heart. Yet Clara did not flinch. She had come to Deadwood with a purpose, and even amid uncertainty she found a strange sense of excitement. The streets, the saloons, the whispering corners, all spoke of a life she had never known but had long imagined. And as she stood on the balcony that evening, watching the lanterns flicker in the gathering darkness, she understood that her story in Deadwood had only just begun. The town would test her courage, her wit, and her resolve, but Clara was ready to face whatever came next. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the wooden slats of the buildings and the distant hills glowed faintly in the twilight, Clara allowed herself a small smile. Deadwood was harsh, dangerous, and unpredictable, but it was also alive, and she intended to live fully within it. With Elias nearby, with knowledge slowly growing in her mind, and with determination in her heart, Clara Hayes had arrived, and nothing in Deadwood would be quite the same again. Life in Deadwood grew more complicated by the day. Clara Hayes, now beginning to understand the rhythms of the town, had settled into her small room at the boarding house, but the quiet was deceptive. The streets were full of activity, yet beneath the chatter and laughter lay tension. Word had spread that a gang of masked outlaws had stolen gold from a nearby mine. The miners, angry and fearful, whispered warnings in every saloon and shop. The stolen fortune was more than money. It was power, reputation, and survival all wrapped together. Elias McGraw, known as Silverhand, was already aware of the theft. He had spent years navigating the dangerous world of Deadwood, and he understood that stolen gold always left a trail of trouble behind. The miners trusted him, and the town looked to him for action, for a man who could bring order when chaos threatened to spill into open violence. Clara watched as he moved through the town, speaking quietly to people who gave him information, observing faces for signs of fear or deceit, and making notes in his own sharp mind about who could be trusted and who might be a threat. Clara was fascinated by the process. She had never seen a town run on such a mixture of lawlessness and order. Every person had a role, even if it wasn't an official one. Some mined gold, some carried weapons, some ran saloons and shops, and others lurked in the shadows, waiting for the chance to take advantage of mistakes or weaknesses. Clara learned quickly that in Deadwood knowledge was power, and power often depended on how much danger a person could survive. She also began to understand the significance of the $1 marriage contract she had signed with Elias. It was not just a legal formality. In a town where a lone woman could be vulnerable to threats from men with ill intent, the contract gave her a shield. It allowed Elias to act on her behalf, to intervene if danger approached, and to use his influence to keep her safe. Yet Clara was not content to remain passive. She wanted to understand the town, to contribute in meaningful ways, and to learn how to navigate the dangers that seemed to lurk in every alley. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Clara accompanied Elias to the site of the stolen gold. Miners had gathered there, faces streaked with sweat and dirt, voices low and tense. The ground around the mine was disturbed, tracks leading into the forest suggesting the escape route of the outlaws. Elias examined the tracks with meticulous care, noting details that would escape an untrained eye. The spacing of footsteps, the angle of disturbance, the marks of boots on the dusty soil. Clara watched closely, absorbing every detail, realizing that even small observations could be the difference between catching the gang and losing the trail entirely. As they followed the path into the woods, Clara felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The forest was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed on the ears and made every snap of a twig sound loud. Elias led the way confidently, his hand near his pistol, eyes scanning the shadows. Clara followed, carrying only a small satchel with essentials, aware that every step could bring them face to face with danger. The journey revealed the harsh reality of life outside the town's boundaries. The wilderness was beautiful, yes, but unforgiving. One misstep could lead to injury, getting lost, or worse. While they tracked the gang, Clara began to notice patterns in the town's life that she had overlooked before. She realized that fear and ambition were constant companions in Deadwood. Every person she met had something to protect, whether it was a claim, a family, or their own safety. Loyalty was fragile. Alliances temporary, and betrayal often hidden behind a friendly smile or a casual greeting. The stolen gold was not just an object of desire. It was a symbol of the town's fragile order and the chaos that threatened to destroy it. Elias and Clara returned to Deadwood in the late afternoon, their presence drawing curious eyes from townsfolk who had heard rumors of the stolen treasure. Some miners were hopeful, others skeptical, and a few openly fearful of the outlaws who might return to claim revenge. Clara realized that the town was on edge, and that every action, every conversation, could have consequences. She began to practice caution in her own behavior, learning to read the subtleties of expression, tone, and body language. One evening, the tension escalated. A messenger arrived at the boarding house, breathless and panicked, reporting that the gang had been spotted near the edge of town. Clara felt her heart quicken as she absorbed the news. This was the reality of life in Deadwood. Danger could arrive at any moment, and there was little time to plan. Elias, calm and resolute as ever, began preparing. He spoke with his trusted allies, assessing the threat and planning how to confront it. Clara helped as best she could, passing messages, keeping watch, and learning from the way Elias approached problem-solving. The following days were filled with a mixture of strategy and waiting. Clara observed Elias in action, noting his ability to remain calm while others panicked. He would speak in quiet tones to those he trusted, always asking questions and listening carefully. He seemed to have a mental map of the town, aware of every street, alley, and hiding place. Clara, who had once seen him as simply a protector, began to understand the depth of his skill and intelligence. He was more than a gunslinger. He was a strategist, a leader, and a guardian of Deadwood's fragile order. During this period, Clara also became aware of the human cost of greed and violence. She saw miners arguing over claims, tempers flaring over small disputes, and tempers threatening to ignite into bloodshed. She noticed families trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, even as fear lurked in every corner. The stolen gold had brought not just danger, but a mirror to the town's own ambitions and weaknesses. Clara understood that survival in Deadwood required both courage and wisdom, the ability to act decisively while maintaining awareness of every possible consequence. One afternoon, Elias took Clara to meet some of the town's key figures, people who had influence and insight into the local dynamics. She met shopkeepers, saloon owners, and miners, each with their own perspective on the events unfolding. Through these conversations, Clara realized that the stolen gold had exposed deeper tensions in Deadwood: rivalries, grudges, and hidden alliances. The town was a web of relationships, each thread delicate and potentially dangerous. Clara's understanding grew, and with it her confidence. She was learning not just to survive, but to navigate the complex social and political landscape of the frontier town. The story of the stolen gold soon became more than a rumor. Sightings of masked outlaws persisted, and every day brought news of small skirmishes or suspicious activity. Clara, alongside Elias, began to track patterns, noting where the gang might strike next and what routes they were likely to take. She learned to spot signs in the environment that others overlooked: broken branches, footprints in soft soil, and faint marks on rocks that indicated recent passage. Each discovery brought a sense of accomplishment, a small victory in a world where danger was constant and the margin for error was slim. Despite the threat, Clara also found moments of humanity and connection. She saw neighbors helping each other, miners sharing food, and townsfolk banding together in the face of uncertainty. These small acts of kindness reminded her that even in a place as dangerous as Deadwood, people could show courage, loyalty, and compassion. The $1 marriage contract that had seemed merely practical now felt like part of a larger bond. Elias and Clara, two people navigating danger together, learning to rely on each other while also discovering their own strength. By the end of the second week, Clara understood that Deadwood was a town of contrasts. It was brutal and unforgiving, yet full of opportunity. It was chaotic, yet governed by unspoken rules. It was dangerous, yet capable of inspiring courage in those who dared to face its challenges. The stolen gold had become a symbol of everything that made Deadwood both frightening and fascinating. Clara, once a newcomer uncertain of her place, was becoming an active participant in the town's life, learning to observe, anticipate, and act. As night fell on Deadwood, Clara stood once more on the balcony of her boarding house. The lanterns cast long shadows, the streets echoed with the murmur of conversations and the occasional clatter of horse hooves, and the hills beyond glowed faintly in the moonlight. She thought of the stolen gold, of the danger lurking in the shadows, and of the lessons she had learned in just a few short days. The town had tested her already, and she knew that the challenges ahead would be even greater. Yet Clara also felt a quiet determination. Deadwood was a place where only the brave and resourceful could survive, and she was determined to be counted among them. With Elias nearby, guiding and protecting her, and with her own courage growing, Clara knew that she would face whatever came next. The stolen gold was only the beginning of the trials that awaited her. In the heart of Deadwood, danger and opportunity walked hand in hand, and Clara Hayes was ready to meet both. Deadwood had never been a quiet town, but in recent days the tension had become almost unbearable. The streets were still alive with activity, miners rushing to claims, merchants calling out their wares, and the occasional sound of laughter drifting from the saloons. But beneath the noise, a dangerous current ran. Everyone seemed to be on edge, waiting for trouble to erupt at any moment. Clara Hayes had learned to recognize the signs: the hurried steps, the darting eyes, the sudden silences when strangers passed. The stolen gold had stirred the town like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples in every direction. Clara walked alongside Elias McGraw one crisp morning, watching the sun reflect off the dusty rooftops. Elias's presence brought a strange mixture of reassurance and alertness. He moved with the ease of a man accustomed to danger, but every glance he cast and every hand motion seemed carefully measured. Clara had learned to observe him closely, noting how he spoke to people, how he assessed threats, and how he planned for situations before they could spiral out of control. She admired him, but more than that, she trusted him. In Deadwood, trust was rare and precious, and Clara had discovered that Elias deserved it. The rumor of the gang's return spread faster than fire through dry grass. Miners whispered about shadows moving near the edge of town, of figures glimpsed in the hills, and of ominous sounds in the night. Elias began preparing the town's defenders quietly, speaking to loyal men and women who were willing to face the danger head-on. Clara noticed how everyone seemed to instinctively respect him. He had a way of commanding attention without shouting or threatening, and his decisions carried weight because people knew he had the skill to back them up. Clara herself had grown more confident. She no longer felt like a helpless observer. She was learning to notice small details, a footprint here, a broken branch there, that others might overlook. Blaine Linson. She helped Elias gather information from the townsfolk, listening carefully to conversations in the saloons and shops, watching for inconsistencies, and piecing together clues about the gang's movements. Each small discovery added to their understanding of the threat, and Clara realized that survival in Deadwood required both courage and intelligence. The tension was not just about the stolen gold. Clara began to understand that Deadwood was a town of rivalries, grudges, and hidden ambitions. Miners argued over claims, shopkeepers worried about their profits, and some townsfolk saw the chaos as an opportunity to settle old scores. The stolen gold had simply brought these conflicts to the surface. Elias explained to Clara that a town like Deadwood was a living organism, full of alliances that shifted with the wind and grudges that could explode without warning. Learning how to navigate these relationships was just as important as knowing how to handle a gun. One afternoon, Clara accompanied Elias to meet with some of the town's more influential figures. These were men and women who could sway opinion, who had knowledge of the surrounding hills, and who knew when to act or remain silent. Clara noticed how Elias treated each person differently, adjusting his words, tone, and body language to match the situation. She realized that leadership was not just about strength, it was about understanding people, anticipating their reactions, and knowing how to influence outcomes without forcing them. While they spoke with the townsfolk, Clara overheard murmurs of fear and frustration. "They'll strike tonight," one miner whispered. "They always wait for the dark." Another added, "If Elias wasn't involved, we'd already be overrun." The presence of the stolen gold had drawn attention not only from outlaws but also from those who might exploit the chaos for their own gain. Clara felt the weight of the danger pressing down. She had thought she understood Deadwood before, but now she realized that the town was like a living puzzle, each piece connected to the next in ways she was only beginning to see. Elias and Clara returned to the boarding house late that evening, moving quietly through the streets. The town was bathed in moonlight, casting long shadows that twisted and shifted with the movement of people and wagons. Clara felt a shiver of anticipation. Every sound seemed louder, every movement more significant. She had learned to listen for what was not said, to watch for subtle changes in behavior, and to sense when something was about to happen. Deadwood was teaching her vigilance, patience, and awareness. That night, as Clara prepared her room for sleep, she thought about the events of the past weeks. She had witnessed the fear the stolen gold had sown, the skill with which Elias protected the town, and the fragile balance that held Deadwood together. She had seen moments of kindness and courage, but also hints of greed and deception. The town was alive, full of opportunity and danger, and Clara understood that her life would never again be simple or predictable. The following days brought small skirmishes and growing unease. Scouts reported suspicious activity near the hills, and townsfolk whispered about men in masks seen moving under cover of night. Clara helped Elias track patterns, noting where the gang might strike and how they might approach. Each observation was a puzzle piece, and together they began to see the shape of the threat. Clara felt a mixture of fear and excitement. The danger was real, but so was the opportunity to prove herself and to help protect the town she had begun to call home. One morning, as the first light of dawn touched the dusty streets, Clara and Elias prepared for a meeting with the miners and townsfolk who had agreed to stand with them. Clara noticed the determination in their eyes, the readiness to face whatever threat might come. She realized that courage was contagious. Seeing others willing to risk themselves gave her confidence. Elias spoke quietly to the group, outlining a plan to confront the gang if they appeared. Clara listened carefully, understanding that preparation and coordination would be as important as courage when the time came. Clara's observations extended beyond the streets and hills. She began to notice changes in behavior among the townsfolk. Some who had seemed timid now walked with purpose, eyes sharp and hands ready. Others grew more secretive, avoiding conversation or casting suspicious glances. The stolen gold had stirred more than just fear. It had revealed character, loyalty, and ambition. Clara realized that understanding people was as crucial as tracking outlaws. She found herself learning quickly, piecing together alliances and motivations in ways that even some of the older residents had overlooked. The tension reached a peak one evening when a rider arrived at the edge of town, panting and covered in dust. He brought news that the gang had been spotted nearby, moving cautiously through the hills. Elias immediately began coordinating defenses, instructing trusted men to watch key routes and to be ready for action. Clara helped pass messages, keep watch, and ensure that everyone understood the plan. The town was on edge, but Clara felt a quiet determination. She had learned how to move through danger, how to anticipate threats, and how to act decisively when needed. During these days, Clara and Elias grew closer, not only through shared danger but through mutual respect. What had begun as a practical arrangement, the $1 marriage contract, was becoming something deeper. Clara saw Elias's humanity beneath the reputation of the feared gunslinger. She saw his sense of responsibility, his careful attention to others' safety, and his willingness to act decisively when the moment demanded it. And Elias, in turn, came to value Clara's intelligence, observation, and courage. They had become a team, navigating the perilous world of Deadwood together, learning to rely on each other in ways that went beyond legal contracts or survival alone. By the end of the third week, the stolen gold had become more than a rumor. It was a real and present danger. Clara understood that the town was teetering on the edge, that a confrontation was inevitable. Yet she also saw the resilience and resourcefulness of the people around her. Miners, shopkeepers, and townsfolk who had once seemed timid were now prepared to stand and fight if necessary. Clara felt a mixture of pride and responsibility. She had arrived in Deadwood as a newcomer, but now she was part of the town's story, learning lessons of courage, strategy, and human nature that she would carry with her forever. As night fell and Clara looked out over the town from her balcony, she thought about what lay ahead. The stolen gold was only one part of the challenge. Deadwood itself, with its rivalries, secrets, and ambitions, was just as dangerous. Yet Clara felt ready. She had learned to observe, to anticipate, and to act. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to face it and move forward. And with Elias McGraw by her side, she knew that whatever storm approached, they would meet it together. The town held its breath as the darkness deepened. Clara could feel it in the quiet whispers of the wind, in the faint rustle of movement beyond the streets, and in the tension that seemed to hum through every corner. Deadwood was on the brink, and Clara knew that the coming days would test her, Elias, and the entire town. The stolen gold, the masked outlaws, and the ambitions of those around them had brought the town to a point of reckoning. Clara stood ready, determined to face whatever came next, knowing that her courage, intelligence, and resilience would be as important as any weapon in the days to come. The morning air in Deadwood was heavy and still, unusual for a town that thrived on movement and noise. A sense of anticipation hung over the streets like a storm cloud, and Clara Hayes could feel it in every step she took. The stolen gold had drawn outlaws closer, and rumors swirled that Elias McGraw's plan to confront them would soon be put to the test. Clara had spent weeks learning the town, observing its people, and understanding its dangers, but nothing had prepared her for the tension that gripped the streets that day. Every glance, every word, every movement seemed charged with the knowledge that violence could erupt at any moment. Clara walked beside Elias, her heart steady but alert. Elias moved with quiet confidence, his eyes scanning the horizon and the streets alike. Though he was a gunslinger with a reputation for speed and precision, he never rushed. His mind was always calculating, always planning. Clara had learned that in Deadwood, the fastest gun was not always the strongest. The smartest strategy, the keenest observation, and the ability to anticipate danger often made the difference between life and death. The townsfolk had gathered quietly in the main street, a mix of miners, shopkeepers, and men willing to stand and defend their homes. They trusted Elias, but trust in Deadwood was fragile. Fear was present in every glance and every whispered conversation. Clara moved among them, passing messages, observing reactions, and noticing small details that could help predict how the confrontation would unfold. She had grown accustomed to the tension, but even now, the knowledge that a violent encounter was imminent caused her pulse to quicken. The gang, led by the cunning and ruthless Jeb Crowfoot Dawson, had been spotted moving toward the outskirts of town. Their arrival was inevitable, and Deadwood's defenders knew it. Elias spoke quietly to his group, outlining positions, signaling points of retreat, and assigning watchers to monitor the hills and alleyways. Clara absorbed every detail, memorizing the layout, the assignments, and the potential weaknesses. She realized that preparation would be as important as courage when the moment of confrontation arrived. As the sun climbed higher, a sense of foreboding grew heavier. Birds scattered from the trees, and the wind seemed to carry whispers of approaching danger. Clara could see the glint of metal in the hills. Guns, knives, and other weapons hidden among the trees. She had witnessed skirmishes before, small disputes that ended with a warning or minor injuries, but this was different. This was a calculated, deadly threat. The stolen gold had not just brought greed, it had brought a test of skill, bravery, and strategy. The first sign of movement came with a sudden rustle in the dry grass. Scouts who had been stationed at the outskirts shouted a warning. Clara felt her stomach tighten, but she did not falter. She knew what needed to be done. Elias raised a hand, signaling the townsfolk to hold their positions and remain calm. His voice, calm and commanding, carried authority. Stay in position. Watch and wait. Move only when necessary. Clara repeated the instructions quietly to those nearby, helping maintain order amid the growing tension. The gang advanced, their figures barely visible against the hills. They were skilled, coordinated, and clearly aware of the town's defenses. Clara observed Elias closely, noting his movements, his gestures, and the subtle signs he used to communicate with his allies. He had a way of controlling the battlefield without raising his voice, without making unnecessary noise, and Clara realized that much of his power came from his ability to think faster than his opponents. The first shots rang out just as the sun reached its peak. Bullets tore through the air, hitting the wooden facades of buildings and kicking up dust from the streets. Clara ducked instinctively, heart pounding, but she did not flee. She had learned too much, understood too much, and felt a growing sense of responsibility. She helped guide townsfolk to cover, signaled positions to those in need, and kept her mind sharp despite the chaos around her. Every action mattered, and Deadwood, even a single mistake, could have devastating consequences. Elias confronted Crowfoot directly, stepping into the open with measured movements. Their duel was fast, precise, and tense. Each gunshot echoed through the town, mingling with the shouts and cries of the townsfolk. Clara watched with a mixture of fear and awe. Elias's skill was undeniable, but the danger was real, and the stakes could not have been higher. The townsfolk depended on his precision and judgment, and he had to protect not just himself, but everyone else in the street. Amid the chaos, Clara noticed smaller dramas unfolding. Miners defended their stores, shopkeepers shielded goods, and ordinary townsfolk discovered courage they had never known. The stolen gold had become a catalyst, forcing people to act and revealing the character of each individual. Clara understood that the battle was not just about guns and skill. It was also about heart, resolve, and the willingness to stand for what mattered. The duel between Elias and Crowfoot reached a critical moment. Both men moved with careful calculation, neither giving the other an opening. Clara held her breath as shots rang out, the air thick with smoke and tension. She saw townsfolk taking cover, some moving strategically to assist those in danger, others frozen with fear. Every second seemed to stretch into eternity, the outcome uncertain. Finally, Elias made his move. With speed and precision, he disarmed Crowfoot, forcing the gang leader to retreat. The remaining outlaws scattered, some attempting to flee through the hills, others caught and restrained by the townsfolk. Deadwood had survived, but at a cost. Buildings were damaged, people were injured, and the echoes of the violence would linger long after the sun had set. Clara felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The danger had passed, but the town had been changed forever. In the aftermath, Clara moved through the streets, helping where she could. She assisted the wounded, comforted the frightened, and helped restore order. She saw the resilience of Deadwood's people, the way they came together despite fear and loss. The $1 marriage contract that had begun as a practical arrangement now felt like a true partnership. Elias relied on her intelligence and courage, and she relied on his skill and experience. Together they had faced the storm and emerged stronger. The bloodbath had shaken the town, but it had also revealed strength and courage that few had known existed. Clara reflected on everything she had witnessed, the strategy, the danger, the fear, and the determination of those who stood their ground. She understood that Deadwood was a town of contradictions, harsh yet alive, dangerous yet full of opportunity, chaotic yet governed by unspoken rules. She had become part of that world, no longer just an observer but a participant. As night fell and the town began to recover, Clara stood beside Elias on the balcony of the boarding house. The streets were quiet now, lit by flickering lanterns, the sounds of the bloodbath fading into memory. She looked at the hills beyond, knowing that danger could always return, but also understanding the courage and resilience that had been displayed. Deadwood had survived, and so had she. Clara realized that the events of the day had changed more than the town. They had changed her. She had faced fear, acted decisively, and discovered strength she had never known. The stolen gold had brought chaos, but it had also revealed her own courage, her ability to think clearly under pressure, and her willingness to stand with others in the face of danger. Elias, standing quietly beside her, seemed to recognize the growth in her as well. Their bond had deepened, built on shared experience, trust, and the understanding that survival required more than skill, it required heart. By the time the moon rose over Deadwood, casting silver light on the dust-streaked streets, Clara felt a sense of calm and resolve. The town would need to rebuild, the gold would need to be secured, and the memory of the bloodbath would linger. Yet Clara knew that she was no longer the same person who had arrived weeks before. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more capable, and she had learned that in a place like Deadwood, courage, intelligence, and determination could turn the tide of even the most dangerous moments. The events of that day would be remembered for years to come. The stolen gold, the deadly confrontation, and the skill of Elias McGraw, the gunslinger who had protected the town. But Clara also understood that the story of Deadwood was bigger than any single duel or outlaw's attack. It was about the people, their resilience, and their ability to face fear and danger together. And in that understanding, Clara found her place, not just as a survivor, but as a part of the town's story, ready to face whatever the future might bring. The streets of Deadwood were quieter now, though the calm felt fragile. The bloodbath of the previous days had left scars both visible and hidden. Wooden boards had been replaced where bullets had struck, splintered doors repaired, and the dust of conflict still clung to the town's corners. Clara Hayes moved through the streets with a sense of purpose and reflection. She had been through danger, fear, and chaos, and now she saw the town in a new light. Deadwood was alive, yes, but it was a town that demanded courage, wisdom, and resilience to survive, and she had discovered she possessed all three. Elias McGraw walked beside her, calm and measured as always. The duel with Jeb Crowfoot Dawson had cemented his reputation as both a gunslinger and a protector. Yet Elias did not carry himself with arrogance. The events of the bloodbath had reminded him that survival was never guaranteed, that every action had consequences, and that leadership was more than skill with a weapon. It was care, strategy, and attention to those around him. Clara admired him for that, even as she recognized the changes in herself. The town began to rebuild. Miners returned to their claims, though eyes remained wary, scanning the hills and streets for signs of returning danger. Shopkeepers reopened their stores, arranging goods with renewed care, and townsfolk who had hidden indoors now emerged cautiously, rebuilding routines disrupted by fear. Clara participated wherever she could, helping neighbors with repairs, delivering messages, and offering comfort to those who had been frightened or injured. Every action strengthened her bond with the town, and she felt a growing sense of belonging. Clara also reflected on her relationship with Elias. What had begun as a $1 marriage contract, a practical measure to ensure her safety, had evolved into something deeper. They had learned to rely on one another in moments of crisis, shared strategies, and trusted each other's judgment. Their bond was no longer defined by legal formalities, but by experience, respect, and loyalty forged under pressure. Clara understood that Deadwood had a way of revealing character, and she felt grateful that the man she had trusted in danger had proven worthy of that trust. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the town's lanterns flickered to life, Clara and Elias walked to the edge of the hills overlooking Deadwood. From this vantage point, the scars of the recent violence were visible, but so was the resilience of the town. The hills were quiet, the air carrying the smell of dust, smoke, and hope. Clara realized that the bloodbath had changed everything. It had exposed weaknesses, revealed courage, and reminded the townsfolk that their survival depended not just on luck, but on awareness, planning, and the willingness to act decisively. The stolen gold had been recovered, in part through Elias's skill and leadership, and in part through the determination of townsfolk who had stepped forward when needed. The miners who had once whispered about danger now spoke openly about their experiences, sharing lessons learned and offering advice to newcomers.
Clara saw how the events had strengthened community bonds despite the fear and loss they had endured.
The town was scarred, yes, but it had grown stronger, and its people had discovered resilience they had not known they possessed. Clara's own transformation was evident. She had arrived in Deadwood uncertain, cautious, and inexperienced. She had watched from the edges as events unfolded, relying on her wits and her trust in Elias to navigate the dangers around her. Now, she walked confidently, aware of her surroundings, attentive to the town's rhythms, and capable of making quick decisions. She had learned to observe human behavior, anticipate danger, and act with courage even when fear pressed upon her. The challenges of Deadwood had taught her lessons no classroom or book ever could. In the weeks following the bloodbath, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Saloons were busy again, laughter mingling with the clatter of glasses. Horses trotted through the streets, merchants called out their wares, and children played where they dared. Yet Clara noticed that even amid the revived energy, there was an awareness that danger could return at any time. The town had endured, but the lessons of the recent days were not forgotten. Every person carried the memory of what had happened, the fear, the courage, and the choices that had determined survival. Clara took time to write letters and keep notes, recording her observations, thoughts, and experiences. She described the daily life of Deadwood, the way the streets thrived yet remained precarious, and the stories of the people who had stood bravely when confronted with danger. Writing became a way for her to process the events, to honor those who had risked their lives, and to preserve the story for the future. She hoped that someday others would understand the complexity of a town that was both wild and resilient, lawless and capable of extraordinary courage. Elias continued to protect the town, though the immediate threat had passed. He kept watch, consulted with miners, and maintained the relationships that had been strengthened during the crisis. Clara, increasingly confident and resourceful, assisted him when needed, whether by observing unusual activity, advising on strategy, or simply supporting those around her. Their partnership was now a matter of mutual respect and shared responsibility, and the townsfolk recognized that their combined efforts had played a crucial role in Deadwood's survival. The legacy of the events began to take shape. Stories of the stolen gold, the masked outlaws, and the bloodbath spread through the region. Campfires, saloons, and trading posts echoed with accounts of bravery, strategy, and survival. Clara, who had once been a stranger in Deadwood, found her observations and writings becoming part of that legacy. Her accounts captured the raw reality of life in a lawless town, the courage of ordinary people, and the skill and resolve of Elias McGraw. She understood that the town's story was more than the duel or the theft. It was about resilience, community, and the capacity to face danger with wisdom and courage. As the weeks turned to months, Deadwood slowly rebuilt its sense of order. Miners continued their work, shopkeepers prospered cautiously, and townsfolk who had once feared the hills now walked with a quiet confidence. Clara's role in the town became recognized not just as a survivor, but as a participant who had contributed to its defense and recovery. She understood that survival was only one part of living. The other was helping the town grow stronger and ensuring that lessons learned were not forgotten. One evening, as Clara and Elias walked through the quiet streets, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered her arrival, uncertain and cautious, and compared it to her current confidence and awareness. Deadwood had tested her in ways she had never imagined, but it had also shaped her, revealing strengths she had not known she possessed. She realized that courage, intelligence, and resilience were not qualities granted by circumstance. They were developed through experience, challenge, and the willingness to act when necessary.
Elias looked at her, understanding reflected in his calm eyes.
"You've learned quickly," he said quietly. "Deadwood isn't kind to the unprepared. But you've adapted. You've grown stronger than I imagined." Clara felt a quiet pride, knowing that she had faced fear, taken risks, and helped protect a town that had become her home.
Their partnership, once a legal arrangement for survival, had evolved into something genuine, a shared understanding forged under fire, respect, and trust.
The stolen gold had long since been secured, and Crowfoot and his gang had been driven from the territory, leaving Deadwood to rebuild. Yet the events remained a permanent part of the town's memory. Stories of bravery, strategy, and survival became lessons for newcomers. Clara, through her writings and observations, ensured that the human element, the courage, fear, and determination of the townsfolk, would not be forgotten. Deadwood's survival was a testament not just to gunslingers, but to ordinary people willing to act when the moment demanded it. Clara stood on the balcony of her boarding house one last evening, gazing over the town bathed in the soft glow of lantern light. She thought of the challenges she had faced, the uncertainty of arrival, the danger of the stolen gold, the bloodbath, and the long days of vigilance that followed. She realized that Deadwood had changed her forever. She had learned to navigate danger, to observe carefully, to act decisively, and to trust in herself as well as in others. She had learned that even in a town full of chaos, courage, intelligence, and integrity could prevail. Elias joined her, and together they looked out over the town they had helped protect and guide. Deadwood was far from perfect. It remained wild, unpredictable, and dangerous. But it was alive, resilient, and full of people who had discovered courage in themselves. Clara knew that the story of the $1 bride, the stolen gold, and the bloodbath would live on, not just as a tale of violence or greed, but as a story of survival, growth, and human resilience. Clara's thoughts turned to the future. She knew that life in Deadwood would continue to be challenging, that danger could return, and that the town would always test those who lived within it. But she also knew that she had grown stronger, wiser, and more capable than she had ever imagined. The events of the past weeks had shaped her into someone who could face uncertainty with courage and thoughtfulness, who could act decisively while remaining aware of the consequences, and who could find strength in partnership and community. And so, as the night settled over Deadwood and the lanterns flickered gently in the streets, Clara felt a quiet peace. She had arrived a stranger, cautious and uncertain, but she had grown into a woman, capable of facing fear, protecting others, and carving her own place in a world that demanded courage. Deadwood had tested her, challenged her, and changed her, and she had survived, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever lay ahead. The town would remember the events, the stolen gold, the duel, the bloodbath, but Clara knew that its true story was larger. It was about courage, resilience, and the capacity of ordinary people to rise to extraordinary challenges. And she, the $1 bride of Deadwood, had become part of that story, a witness and participant whose courage and determination would never be forgotten.